Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and Happy New Year. Welcome back to our discussion about socialism versus capitalism. Now, when we look at the issue of socialism as opposed to capitalism, it's discussed in the context of the alleged retreat of neoliberalism globally. Why are theories of Karl Marx still relevant in the 21st century? What does socialism actually mean for China? And don't forget, we are confronting the idea of populism, which led to the rise of Donald Trump, as well as Brexit, as well as the referendum voting for the independence of Catalonia in Europe. We have so many issues. If you put them into the same perspective, that somehow refers to the land book of Das Kapital. So welcome back. We are joined here by the same guest speakers that we had in the first chapter of the year-end special. They are Charles Liu, founder of How Capital, Ravish Bhatia, the Yanjing Academy Scholar of Peking University, Claire Pearson, DLA Piper Law Firm International Director, and Anna Tangen, writer and columnist. Welcome to our year-end special, the second chapter. This time around, let me give the floor to Charles about the implications of populism. Now, Steve Bannon, who is said to be the strategic advisor to Donald Trump, has been ousted from the White House, but his enormous influence could still be felt every passing day in American politics. By saying this, my understatement actually refers strongly to the white losers in the Rust Belt. Do you think these guys are the proletarians? And do you think Steve Bannon called himself he's a Leninist? And do you think there's any ring of truth in what he says?
I think if we look at what happened in the United States in the last 20 years or so, 15 to 20 years, what we've seen, for example, Boston Consulting Group has done a study. Manufacturing has moved out. Partly has moved out to Asia, but 80% of job loss of the middle class, blue-collar middle class, came from automation, from assembly lines run by robots. So can you really blame these people who had a good life, who no longer have a good life, who now have an opiate problem, who now have unemployment issues, and wealth concentrated on Wall Street and California in the tech tycoons? They are looking for a way out. They no longer can see a comfortable life for their next generation. So this is the populism that comes from, I guess, economic transformation in the United States, and also, I think, even more deeply rooted issues in America. Last year was the first time in history that less white babies were born than non-whites. You have a population that is changing in demographics. African slavery leaves a lot behind, and these are issues which are pretty fundamental and will be difficult to address. And South American immigration. California will collapse without the Mexican labor, including many what they call illegals. So these are issues for America that has brought about, I think, populism. Europe is a different set of issues. European populism is anti-immigration, is part of the same as the U.S.
Let's look at populism across the Atlantic Ocean. In the United States, Anna, do you think the white losers, the poor whites in the Rust Belt, in the Rust Belt, represent their yearning for a fair share in income redistribution? So what happened was the appeal, very strong appeal for income redistribution to somehow wipe out the Wall Street. And don't forget, Pope St. Francis, the Pope in Vatican, also stands for egalitarianism or the rise of the underprivileged. Is that part of the populism? Is that part of the driving force behind the populism which put Donald Trump into the White House?
Well, I'm going to agree with Charles on this one. This is a situation where since 1980 you've seen a GDP of the world go up 630%. Yet, look forward to today. Are we more united? Are we taking care of the poor? What have we done with these supposed riches that we have? And, as you pointed out, automation, technology, is pushing us in a new direction. And this is one of the problems. The United States, the government, a democracy is not well equipped to plan for the future. It can react to things as they come. I was in politics. I know for a fact you're so busy reacting to what's in front of you, it's very, very difficult to plan 20 or 30 years into the future, as China is able to do. What national person has actually voiced any kind of vision beyond the next 4 years, beyond the next time that they intend to get reelected? And this is one of the shortcomings that is going. Yesterday we had a question about democracy and middle classes. The problem is, if the middle class is failed by democracy, all right, they will look for alternatives. And right now, China has a very, very different model, which is able to address, I think, in a better way, what has to be the changes that are coming. Because these will not, you said 80% of the jobs have been lost. Let's talk about driverless cars, about more automation, about printed factories. When you start looking at this profound changes, unless you have a government who's taking the big hand and managing things, it will go very quickly.
Claire, Anna, do you think we are barking at the wrong tree, since the middle class is no longer what it was? If you look at the poor salaries, their salaries have not risen for years in the United States, for example.
Since 2008.
And I believe middle class in European countries share the same complaints about the poor level of their income. Does that mean the middle class is sinking and they have become blue-collar workers? They have again been pushed back to the class of a proletarianism.
Standards of living are sinking, but hackles are rising. And there is a connection between the US and Europe in this area. And that connection actually is Steve Bannon. So in Britain, it's definitely about work. The new reality in the new world with a sluggish growth in the global economy is about jobs. It's not about anything else. And the problem is that countries like Britain are very divided between the North and South. Countries like the US are very divided between the wealth on the coastlines and the poverty in the middle. And you need people who can bridge that. I had quite a shocking experience. I went to see Donald Trump speaking soon after he was elected, and it was a big venue like this. And the speaker before him was a phenomenal orator. And he was really giving it some. And I thought, wow, I wouldn't want to speak after that guy. I thought, how's Trump going to show he's the president when he's not quarter as articulate as the first speaker? So when Trump stood up, he said to the first speaker, he said, nice speech, because he understood the sympathy in the audience. He said, your son's in the audience, isn't he? And he said, to Barry Black's son, Dad's job safe for another year. See, Trump's a bit of a master there, because he's saying, you might be more articulate than me. This audience might love you more than me, but I pay you. You see, Trump understands one factor. People today need a job. It's the same factor that caused Brexit in the UK. People are fearful about their income.
Do you think the issue of job creation could be made possible, Ravish, through rejecting the establishment, elites, and globalization? At the same time, it seems there are far more job opportunities in the dynamic Chinese market than in the flagship democracy across the Pacific Ocean. You know what I mean, the United States.
There are two issues here. One, are there more opportunities? And second, if there are opportunities, do the people across the Atlantic want people from the other side of the pond to have those opportunities? And this trend of reverse globalization, or what we call reverse brain drain, would happily work in the favor of Asian economies. And that's increasingly happening now. With the stricter enforcement of the H-1B rules in the US, I think the mistake that populism, mixing populism with economics in the establishment has done is that they miss out on the key factors of human talent that in the first place drove their economy to such great heights. And what we see within these economies is increasing sense of dissatisfaction. There are millennials voicing as in protests on Occupy Wall Street movements. They're voicing their support for soft socialist Democrats like Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn. And these things represent a trend. It represents a more systemic challenge that exists, that needs to be addressed, not necessarily by the whole population, but especially so by the policymakers who are leading these countries.
A recent poll, Charles, reported by Bloomberg shows a majority of American millennials would prefer to live under a socialist or a communist government system than under capitalism. Is that a big surprise for you?
Actually, it depends on how the question was phrased to address the millennial. Millennials are no longer able to afford colleges because they can't afford the loans. They are no longer able to afford renting to live out. They are living with their parents now. It's absolutely amazing what the millennials compared to compared to 1 or 2 generations ago, what they were able to do. It is very sad that the educational level on average is going down, hence income level goes down. What does it mean when you can only go flip hamburgers or work in Amazon stocking shelves or moving logistics or goods and products? I think if you address the issue of having greater taxation on the wealthy to provide better benefits for the less wealthy population, everybody will say yes. And on that basis, if that was what was asked of them in terms of what socialism stands for, I think, sure, more of them will vote for it, would support it. But the problem in the US is that there's been such strong, over decades during the Cold War period, of propaganda against socialism, starting with against communism, that it's very difficult for the population to accept something that moves in that direction. You also have the other issue of increasing polarization through social media. You only hang out on social media with those who think like you, so they're no longer as broadly open-minded in terms of seeing things than before. So the polarization is continuing, and it doesn't augur well when you got 300 million registered guns in a society that continues to have polarization.
I think I'd like to weigh in on that. When millennials reject capitalism, that does not translate into the fact that millennials automatically want socialism.
That's right.
Or support socialism. So when such surveys shows that there's an entrenched sense of dissatisfaction with what exists, it means that then that they want reform. The problems that we've discussed in the past that deal with especially high student loans, privatization of education, healthcare, and public goods such as water supply, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is privatized in the UK. These sort of things, they aggravate a person that in his 30s or 20s that is trying to rise in the social hierarchy. And it's usually easier in a socialist system or a socialist-like system for this person to be considered equitable or reach the same position as somebody who's in his 40s or 50s. Is that a good thing? I don't necessarily think so. But what I'm trying to say is that they're rejecting capitalism, but also not completely vouching for socialism in its strongest sense.
One side effect or alleged evil of capitalism, Claire and gentlemen, I'm afraid is about joblessness or unemployment. Well, the trade union seems to be playing a pivotal role in ironing out the differences and discrepancies between the employers and the employed. Why did Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister, decide to reject the labor movement and decide to privatize the industry? To privatize, that means more workers would be made redundant, adding to the discrepancies and popular social resentment. Don't forget, part of the essence concerning Das Kapital is that the naked exploitation of the working class would be the hotbed that breeds popular resentment, and that would lead to revolution, to overthrow the capitalist government.
I mean, 3 letters. Margaret Thatcher was interested in 3 things: ROI, return on investment. So if it makes money, it doesn't care how much you have to bleed to deliver it, just deliver the cash. And then the money from, say, North Sea oil, from the privatized mines, went straight into the City of London and then was invested globally, because that was globalization, Thatcherism, and so capital was outbound. If the money that was made in the 80s through Northern Oil, for example, we could have been like Oslo today. But because the money was concentrated, the wealth was concentrated within the hands of a few, we have this disparity in income that led to Brexit.
So the role of the trade union.
The trade union. I mean, I started life working for a trade union. And it is absolutely critical that you train people in society who can interface up and down the social ladder. And the problem is that in the UK, 10% of the people go to a paid school from the age of 5. So from the age of 5, they learn to mix with people like them and only them. The other 90% go to a school for the rest of the people, the proletariat, if we're in a Marxist term, go to the free schools. When you get to work, the people who've paid for school, they want to cash in at work and get fast stream promotion. They become the bosses. And then the people who've not paid for their education will often be more humble. I didn't pay for my education, but when I arrived at school, when I arrived at work, I realized there needed to be an interface with management to manage the expectations of the people who were just as able but less entitled. So I think trade unions are critical at managing the potential for social destruction in a country. I had a big argument about the Chinese model the other day. It was at the weekend, and I was speaking to a gentleman whose country is currently involved in a civil war. And I was saying, oh, core leader, increasing oppression, migrant workers, you know, what are you doing in China? And he said simple, Claire. He said, I like the Chinese model because first they control the people, but the social contract is second. They give them the hospitals, they give them the schools, and they give the opportunity to advancement that they require. So I feel that if China gets this right, it will beat the UK in terms of squashing the unions.
The idea of communism or socialism not only bred or helped establish the Soviet Union and Communist Party of China, founding of the PRC. It also generated a lot of political upheavals across the Euro-Asia continent. Don't forget, at the same time, in Latin America, we have the issue of Bolivarianism or socialism in Venezuela and Cuba. They antagonized the American hegemonism or imperialism by taking back the private ownership, taking under control the oil industries. That caused very bloody side effects such as coup attempts. So what do you think of the chaos in Latin America? Part of that arises from the use of socialism conceptually.
Well, quite frankly, we've now veered onto another topic, which is democracy versus communism. I mean, what we have here. Socialism might be the answer. I think...
Or utopianism, eventually.
Well, the whole point is socialism, the vast majority of the world believes in socialism, that there has to be a safety net, that there are certain things that we owe each other. All right? I was also in Britain at the time of Margaret Thatcher. There was another side to it. 98 pence on the pound past a certain point would go in tax. So you earned £1, 98% would go away. And Oxford University Don earned the same amount as somebody who was working on the line at the Cowley Works where I was in Oxford. So there were things. The issue here is how you balance these things. It's not a switch where you turn it off and on. And this is what I respect about China. They are taking this, we have questions, we have doubts, we're going to study. We're going to try to pick a path in between these. Socialism, if it's not sustainable, is just simply a pipe dream. And this is what you have in South America. What they did is they nationalized it. They forgot to put capital back in, maintenance back in, so therefore they couldn't produce any more oil. So they can't pay back their loans. So everything that they're doing, the richest country in South America, Venezuela, all right, is now a disaster. They cannot take care of it. They don't have basic medicines or food to feed their people. So this is an example that you have to have something in between. This is why I do like this idea of a guiding hand of government which controls the free market. The free market is not a good thing by itself. Yes, it can lead to efficiency. On the other hand, it leads to monopolies. Unfettered greed has helped nobody except a very, very few people.
And the statement of your analysis, and I'm afraid, is the utopian elements of socialism, quote-unquote, needs to be compromised by the introduction of modest market economy or some elements of capitalism to come up with something that works in the individual countries and economies. Having said this, let's take questions from the audience here. Yes.
I'm curious about why every time we should address two economies as socialism, capitalism, and communism, and why we never consider them as their trend and how the trend is going. It's a rising economy. We have to describe this with these terms. Why? It's so important.
I agree. This is why from the very, very beginning I said this ism thing is irrelevant. Because during Karl Marx period, he talked about surplus value created by the labor extracted by the capitalist. He was talking about the first phase, as you said, absolutely true, first phase of industrialization. Industrialization is what creates wealth in society. How it's distributed, there are many ways that it can be done. The key question is 19th century, UK industrialization. 20th century, really it's US, Japan and Germany industrialization. Today is industrialization in China. And what industrialization has done, for China at least, is to create sufficient wealth so people can be fed. So there's a middle class rising and so on and so forth. So I agree wholeheartedly that we shouldn't be getting into the isms. Because the minute you get into isms, you get into this thing about democracy, or dictatorship, strong arms, strongman politics. It's a question of what are you providing for your people, and that's the key.
Part of what you're rejecting is the fact that things have moved on. When they had first the idea of GDP, it was based on the idea that if you made something in your country, everything that went into that was from your country. But today it doesn't work that way, and the metrics of how we measure things have moved on. And these isms are a good example of that.
You mentioned before technology and the benefits or the loss that it can cause in society. And nowadays China has been celebrated as a new hub of technological advancement. And I would like you to ask, what is your take on the fast-growing technology and also, for example, internet companies in China? Is there a threat for the redistribution of wealth, or is there an opportunity?
I think in many ways, and I'll go back to this point, what China has is it has a different way innovation happens. And a lot of that happens through a system of open networks. There are so many open softwares available. There are people, engineers, sharing their codes in innovation centers in a way, and special economic zones, and working together in that way, much like how it is in the Silicon Valley as well. What these socialist ideas or these means of social production, especially in information-based economy where things are shared openly and freely do, they encourage innovation and growth of technology much quicker than, say, would happen in a society where you restrict property rights and patents, very strong patents, in the exchange of such information.
You're talking about the soft side.
On the soft side, at least.
On the hard side.
On the hard side, it's just money.
No, it's Shenzhen, where every component you want is within 10 kilometers of a center. And you don't have to go order from Singapore or from Taiwan or from Korea. You can trial your new product and prototype with China's speed.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
I was talking to a friend from Tsinghua who set up a very unique tech-based company, which was a hardware company. And I asked him, what What drove you? What kind of, why could you stayed in the US for 5 years? Why were you not able to do that in the US? Why were you able to build this company here? He said that Tsinghua, the university which he was from, openly gave them access to a lot of the patents to use them.
Yep.
So there are these capitalist concepts embedded in the Chinese society, but they are just more open in sharing and access.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the top IT guys, I mean, they all went over to build Facebook. You know, Facebook was basically built on the back of a Chinese IT competition, all the programming, even though it had an American guy at the front. So they all came back 5 years ago and they set up their own companies, phenomenal companies. And I mean, I was in Jingdong the other day. You walk into the shop, your face, you buy your stuff, you walk out of the shop, you don't even need to pick up your phone to pay because the facial recognition automatically deducts your bread, your apples and your peanuts from your tray. So that is a personless. You go through Shenzhen Airport, it is techie. The top techs are here. Our best AI clients in the law firm, they're all from Guangdong, Shenzhen. China's always best at maths. It's going to win in this sector.
There's one more question from the
But let me just answer your question very shortly. It is a threat if you do not plan for it. It's an opportunity if you do.
This is the last question.
China plans
The lady
very well.
first. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to come up with a new idea. That is, are we wrong to make it always opposite from between capitalism and socialism? Because we know these are two different words to describe the different behaviors in a society. And because China is socialism, and we become stronger, and those countries in capitalism think, oh, you are different from me, so you become stronger, and you are my enemy. Is that real enemy? It's just imaginary enemy. So I think we need to be confident to accept the differences, and also to learn from the difference from others. So sometimes I think it's unnecessary to talk more about we need to beat this reform, and we have to fall and support our own. Is that wrong? Do you think so?
Well, basically what she says is that the idea of having this debate focusing on capitalism as opposed to socialism threatens to polarize this world. She thinks this is wrong. Well, with insightful analysis from the panelists and proactive participation, good questions from the audience, we come to the conclusion of the second chapter of our year-end special to hopefully usher in 2018. And this year we'll witness the 200th anniversary of Karl Marx, who wrote not only the book called Das Kapital, but also Scientific Socialism, which led to the birth of Soviet Union and contributed to the proletarian political movement. Much of the political upheavals in the 20th century. With that, we come to the end of the second chapter, our year-end special. Thank you so much for your contribution and participation. I do appreciate this brainstorming.
Really, a pleasure. Great pleasure.
Really enjoyed meeting you.
Wonderful. Always so.
Because everything you say, I agree.
Hope you enjoyed it.
I really liked your points on that.
Sorry we didn't get questions from you.
Thanks, Jan Ray. Thanks for giving me a